Well guys, it looks like after 8 Assassin's Creed games and years of claims, Ubisoft finally did it here in 2012. They finally did it, guys. The French monolith of a company finally figured out where their cinematic design was within their redundant, overbearing corporate structure. Unlike past games that range from damned great to mediocre to the purest example of the opposite of entertainment, it took Assassin's Creed 3 for Ubisoft to finally realize that their cereal box sandboxes didn't need to be populated with 95% weird robots conducting half-remembered sequences through their sparking, twitching heads. But to be fair, Assassin's Creed 3 still has enough of these iRobot wannabes to fill 7 warehouses on the Eastern Shore. I'll say this first before I get into the nitty-gritty critical staring at the multinational interpretation of the American Revolution, because it's a nice thing to give some praise during the 1 month after the holiday season. Haytham Kenway was a goddamned miracle that happened in New York town. The game started us out with this Puss in Boots already in mid-assassination at one of the local theaters. It turned out that he was trying to form a new brotherhood of sorts in colonial America after learning of a first civilization cache of things in the middle of New England countryside. AC3's first 3 chapters were concerning the recruitment of a bunch of the 13's most pristine and prominent weirdos to ever sail their ships. Statecrafters, merchants, disgraced gamblers, you name it, he's got it. I would compare this intro to the start of Kingdom Hearts 2, and I know that the fictitious first week section gets a lot of flack, but I found it so personally heartwarming and nostalgic that I ended up putting Roxas in my top 10 favorite characters list almost immediately right alongside new inductee, this guy. With this game, it seems like Ubisoft was finally ready to put the money down on character development, something lacking from most of the franchise because Haytham is sort of a complicated guy and also a Hollywood cliche rolled into one. His entire personality is that fun trope of being too old to deal with any of this shit. He doesn't deal with things that annoy him and prefers just to stab his way through all his problems, and is unflappable in almost every situation, no matter how ridiculous. And beyond his obtuse, slightly stubborn outside, belies a cool intelligence that puts him 3 moves ahead of everybody he comes into contact with. This is a man who knows how to play his cards even before he meets his opponent, and has already won the game before the opponent has even figured out what's going on. Haytham Kenway is a brilliant character, has a great design, and a wonderful enigmatic voice acting job that makes him a standout to truly rival Ezio Auditore for the top franchise main character.
I have an idea.
Well, let's hear it.
I'll kill the lookout, take up a position behind the guards. You two approach from the front. When I open fire on the group, you charge in. We'll have the element of surprise on our side. Half will fall before they've even realized what's happened.
It's too bad that he gets stabbed up by the end of the game, but that thing tends to happen when you condense an entire character arc from a trilogy into a single game with the clever clogs of Connor Davenport. I suppose if Connor were an asshole, he'd call Connor his slave name, but his native name is so amazingly hard to pronounce that I'm not even going to bother. Seriously, look at this and tell me what consonant game we're playing here, because this is ridiculous. Unlike Ezio and Altair, Connor is a more generic archetype of Sandbox character and is basically cobbled together from all the downtrodden aspects of the Sandbox era. Connor is a non-land-owning Native American who did not become on-paper allies with the newly formed America, and by the end of the game he became a second-class non-citizen who lost literally everything to his name. Now, while Connor can't hold a candle to the true glory of Haytham, the work that Ubisoft put into the game in general did cast down to him as well, and while he's not as witty or as charming as Ezio or Haytham, Connor ends up being brash and more of a talking with his fists kind of person, with an arm's-length approach to the American Revolution and most people he interacts with, preferring more to scheme against the Templar crew that he finds himself up against. And I suppose it shouldn't surprise, after I revealed that the first quarter of this game was spent recruiting a new group looking for assassin secrets, that Connor has been put on a death path crossing with his own father, Haytham Kenway. Now, that story is not particularly interesting. He saved Connor's mother from slavery back in the day, and she was a non-traditional, strong-willed type of gal, so the pair ended up in a short fling back to our worlds type of deal. That and Connor's mother sort of ended up dead a couple of years afterwards, so, you know, what could you do? What you could do is probably not have started the attack that caused her death in the first place. A neat trick of storytelling that Ubisoft used here could have been clever if it also wasn't as blunt as a stone hammer, was that when the game switched between Haytham and Connor as main characters, the aristocratic, organized Templar crew immediately turns into a bunch of unrepentant dickheads killing and looting for seemingly zero logical reason. It's an important sticking point because, like a lot of these Creed titles, Templars do want to get a word in edgewise. They do want their plans to make sense, but they don't seem to realize that their actions speak louder than their words, which leads to the point when Ubisoft wants to make that, oh, the villain has a point moment. It tends to ring pretty damned hollow. The reason is that after Chapter 3, we never see the Templars' schemes from their side, and from Connor's perspective, it looks like the Templars are engaging in counterfeiting, bribery, corruption, and other objective criminal behavior just for the sheer lols. Like it's somehow hilarious to plot murders of important generals and destabilizing a fledgling country's economy right out of the damn gate. On top of that quite evil introduction, Connor's character arc begins with Charles Lee and the Templars setting fire to Connor's village and quote-unquote unwillingly killing Connor's mother in a barn blaze. Afterwards, he was directed to the Colonial American Assassin Brotherhood, directed by a local guy named Achilles Davenport. Yes, Achilles Davenport, who ended up getting a similarly enigmatic design and voice actor to Haytham's. He seems to be a landowning black man who isolated himself in the middle of the woods and allowed the Assassin Order to fall into basically non-existence. His voice actor also does a great job of bringing across his wizened, old kook character where he has all the knowledge to offer Connor, but also couldn't give much of a shit about much outside of his homestead until it's threatened by the local bandits, who Connor helps vanquish while he was coincidentally sleeping out in Achilles' barn.
That's all right. I know they've a certain allure. Very well. I'll train you. Then we'll know if you've the right to wear those robes.
Thank you.
Name's Achilles.
Thanks to that, Achilles agrees to train him and push him onto his revenge quest to murder the Templar Order in order to save fledgling America unwittingly, but also the native village who's being threatened every other half-decade in this history. Due to the, let's say, unconventional methods of Connor's training, his kit is not as technologically impressive as Renaissance-era Ezio's was, yet it is better tied to the character of Connor. He has a single hidden blade augmented by a tomahawk for close combat. He's given a bow, some snares and trap mines, and some rope darts brought over to the States by a famous assassin of old China. It's a very patchwork kit that reflects the idea that Connor is basically on his own, and while the tools seem to be random, there's no doubt that they are effective. The rope darts are long range and a useful stealth option. Smoke bombs are always useful, even though I wouldn't put them in the quick equip if you ask me, and frankly, Connor's tomahawk skills are amazing as Ubisoft kind of gave up trying to have challenging combat design and any sort of thoughtful strategies in AC3 and replaced that entirely with tons of effort being dumped into epic and chilling kill shots and executions while Connor is counter-killing his way through every enemy in the game. Yes, you will be seeing a lot of these repeat, as is the tradition for combat systems relying on slow-mo execution shots. However, the fluid integration of these executions into regular gameplay and simply how vicious and satisfying they are to see pulled off is a spectacular fleshing out of normally tedious Assassin's Creed combat that is highly appreciated, even though the simplistic combat boils every battle in the game down just to hitting the same button over and over again. But that's the sacrifice sacrifice you make when you decide to streamline your sandbox. And speaking of sandbox design, this is a major glaring issue of Assassin's Creed 3 overall. There is zero justifiable reason for Assassin's Creed 3 to even be a sandbox game. It managed to have less content on the side than the already paltry presentation of the previous Revelations, if you can believe that, and what makes it even worse is that AC3 has to have one of the biggest sandboxes in the damned franchise, as the franchise begins to switch from focusing on the story of the assassins to focusing on the story of the history research. Why does the game have this ridiculously vast frontier sandbox? Because they wanted to show how Lexington, Concord, Boston, and New York are all linked to each other, and how close quarters the American Revolution as a war was? What this ended up looking like in day-to-day gameplay was bothersome, aggravating slogs through giant maps containing zero additional content other than the story missions. If you want a side mission in this game, you certainly aren't going to be finding much by chance, and even when you get to New York and Boston town, where these side quests are easier to find, Ubisoft decided to chop off a lot of the usual missions you'd find in these games down to try and streamline its usual sandbox design. I do appreciate the idea Ubisoft had to allow the player to slip in and out of side quests without too much stopping and starting, but without these strong establishing shots, the side quests end up completely one-dimensional, as Ubisoft immediately gave up writing a plot to any of these side quests, even considering their usual lackadaisical attitude towards these wastes of time. The obvious problem with these side quests is that without any writing or plot to follow, any reward given for doing any of this crap is incredibly hollow and intangible, especially when the only thing the game rewards you with for doing the side quest is liberation percentages and tiny amounts of money. And since we're talking the game's economy, let's talk about Ubisoft's other traditional problem that popped up in AC3, meaningless management mechanics. Back in the Ezio trilogy, it was all about purchasing entire cities as an addition to its city liberation objectives. But in 3, that was entirely replaced with Connor turning the Davenport homestead into a mercantile operation thanks to a local legend of sailing turning over his ship to his services, along with the local experts of logging, fur trade, and farming to help Connor turn his obtained materials into sellable goods onto trading ships to other colonies and countries. The problem with this entire idea is that, unlike the Ezio trilogy, Ubisoft did not incorporate the system into regular gameplay, so instead of buying shops that you simply come across during your commute with a couple buttons, in 3 you have to make these long-ass trips between merchants and the homestead to build goods and then send them on their way on the damned boat. I never conducted the whole mercantile prudence quest of Connor's because I simply couldn't find it while I was looking for side quests. And I certainly wasn't going to go out of my way to build this invisible nonsense to then sell to people I would never ever see for pointless cash. What the hell am I going to spend all this goddamn money on when I can't even find the weapon shop in the game? I stuck with the basic kit you get at the start and got through everything fine because your beginning level weapons are still easily able to defeat end level challenges. Ubisoft spent all this time and effort building these management mechanics, but crucially forgot to give the player an understanding about how the system works or any motivation to do it in the first place. At least in the Ezio trilogy, the ridiculous amounts of money you were making allowed you to buy the entire city. There isn't any investments to buy in AC3, so why the hell should Connor be generating the money in the first place? All the sandbox in Assassin's Creed 3 does is give you these giant commutes from A to B that I did take on foot because 1, I was holding out hope that there would be some side quest to do somewhere at some time. Hell, I got so flippin' bored during these commutes that I would actively go after synchronization points on the map if they appeared. Talk about desperate. and 2, the horse in Assassin's Creed 3 are so useless for traversing the frontier between all the trees and the rivers that they started becoming active liabilities to me about a minute of riding at best. The climbing mechanics in this game are rightly fucked up the ass, with so many character location problems that at one point during the endgame my horse ended up getting stuck in a fence and Connor was able to break a lock around chapter 11 just by jamming 2 knives into the side of it. It definitely made the Almanac collectibles a right ass, between the climbing problems the game had, along with its poor definition of what it meant to be touching one of these floating nightmares. However, while the sandbox design of this game is completely unnecessary and ridiculously fucked up, the added details to produce a more cinematic game made for a thoroughly enjoyable single-player campaign. There is a caveat to this though, as Ubisoft started leaning back on their cinematic glories, and that's how Assassin's Creed 3 turned from a usual Creed game to become the spectacle known as Cutscenes the video game. This isn't even a damn joke. Whenever you move to a new objective marker or completed half of your current mission, you would be greeted to a new cutscene of the game's characters giving you monologues in order to explain your next move, where you'd see another cutscene, and then another, and then a big ol' cutscene sandwich made of 3 consecutive cutscenes mashed together. That's such little gameplay to be found in Creed 3 that this game would be much better served to be rebranded as a History Channel special for July 4th week. Like I said, the characters have personalities in this game finally, the scripts are on point, and the history is well presented. But in the context of this being an interactive experience, it begins to drag on the player when you are hitting a new one of these cutscenes every 5 minutes. It's a fun time to get in on some of the important moments of the American Revolution, the Tea Party, the Stamp Tax Revolt, seeing Valley Forge, and some of the important battles of the Revolution, culminating in the Battle of Virginia at Sea, where Connor's majestic ship gets to stretch its battle legs, yet the inconsistency of the story constantly switching between the war focus and the assassin focus makes it hard for me to be interested in either one, because suddenly Connor, after winning the day for the Patriots, will head off to kill one of the Templars that he just knows is behind this without any say-so, and with a really stupid plan behind him. At least there's a bit more to the assassinations this time, since Ubisoft decided to introduce the villains at the start of the game using actual dialogue, rather than all the Templars showing up in one scene yelling "fuck you" at the assassins and then leaving forever until whoever stabs him in the neck. Hopefully, what'll be leaving forever is also the constantly moronic Desmond framing device, since it actually ended this game with the death of Desmond Miles. The deal this time around is that after locating the Golden Temple at the end of Revelations, the Scooby Gang relocated there in front of a locked door from the first civilization. Desmond needs to delve into his past again to find the ancestor who knows where the key is, which led us to the Haytham-Connor tag team in the first place. Is the Animus really so stupid that it's able to detect the key-based memories and yet not manage to show where the key is during the search? Or is this all just concentrated sci-fi bullshit? Along the way, Desmond also needs to collect several civvy batteries to power the door because of reasons, and apparently the audience wanted to see Desmond doing some parkour in combat. No, we didn't, but thanks for asking. The Desmond framing device is still the worst part of the entire Creed franchise, even if it's taking up extra screen time. At the end of the game, and Desmond managed to grave rob the key from Connor's estate, they returned to what's beyond the door and figured out through a first civvy spat that after failed experiment to protect the planet from the solar disaster, Juno has been leading Desmond to her all this time simply to free her from jail. Minerva shows up on the scene to warn Desmond that once she protects the planet one time, she will also begin working on its enslavement. The humans have run out of time to figure out another solution, so Desmond decides to just go for it, touches a magic ball that kills him and frees Juno into the bargain. My question for the ending of AC3 is that if all this bullcrap seen in every other game plotted out this huge prophetic storyline to build up Desmond as the man that'll save the planet, knowing the exact date and place that Desmond would be found to give him that knowledge, why did the first civilization leftovers do all of that if the humans had already run out of time needed to solve the problem by the time that Desmond finds the first breadcrumb? This is one of the big reasons that the people writing the Creed prophecy need to stop. The story hasn't had a basis in reality since it began, and it's obvious that Ubisoft have been writing it from the seat of their pants with no clue of what they were doing. Not only does this entire conspiracy make no sense and is amazingly irritating, it's also contradicting itself to the point that when it ends in AC3, it turns out that the entire prophecy was completely meaningless. The humans can't fix the problem, they've run out of all the time to do so, and even then, who gives a fucking shit? Humans are guaranteed to survive anyway, so there's no threat to this apocalypse. They'll rebuild, the cycle will continue, and just like Link in the Zelda series, you might as well stop caring if the world is going to be infinitely threatened by the same monster over and over again. Fuck it, Desmond. It doesn't matter what you do because the Earth and humanity is guaranteed to be fine no matter what, constantly getting blown up by the sun. And while I did enjoy getting to play the single-player campaign, it would have been a lot better quality-wise if Ubisoft had cut out the entire sandbox, eliminated the management gameplay, and kept it focused on one story. It's fun to see them planning and getting involved in the revolution firsthand because the story writing in AC3 is great. The gameplay is pretty lacking since a lot of effort was put onto the plot, with little time for interactivity from the player. The game relies more on its staple missions: tailing, eavesdropping, beating up, and combat sections. This could have been helped with optional side quests, but Ubisoft cut them down to their nuts and bolts, which meant that they were hard to find and also completely lacking in worthwhile gameplay. One of the side quests was literally pressing a button near something useful and then picking up a person and putting them in a different place 100 meters away. That's dreadful! Overall, while Assassin's Creed 3 is putting forth promising potential, the complete lack of attention to meaningful sandbox design ends up with a lot of player time being wasted and annoyance brewing, so it's pretty much a mixed bag game. Does some big things right and some big things wrong. I do appreciate getting to see the full extent of Connor's character arc all in one go, since it keeps me invested in his struggles. But there are other ways to do that, and it's why this game should have been designed more as a God of War style third-person adventure, rather than a sandbox full of nothing but trees and feathers. We'll continue on down the Assassin's Creed rabbit hole until the very end, and until the next video, we'll slap a final scoreboard up there, and wish you all out there a victory for gamers. Thanks for watching!